Yo, tonight we're deep diving into the actual Wild West. No cap. Forget that Hollywood cap. We're talking about that gritty, low key, scary reality where survival was a major L for most. You might think you're built different, but trust me, there's a huge reason they called it wild. If you're vibing with these stories, smash that like button or even subscribe. It helps more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from. So drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Love seeing our little global community link up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that white noise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Period. We're going to explore why you might not survive even a single day in the untamed American frontier. Congratulations. You've just spawned in the American Wild West of the 1,870 seconds. The huge W, you're seeing history firsthand. The major L, your survival rate just hit rock bottom, no cap. The first challenge hits you before you even open your eyes. The smell, not that earthy nature vibe you'd expect, but something way more pungent. We're talking main character energy stench, unwashed bodies, animal droppings, and maybe even raw sewage just hanging there. Low-key, bathing wasn't the priority. Most settlers treated the basic wash like a monthly DLC rarely happened. Some went a whole season without hitting the shower. Water was high-key precious, and using it to clean yourself felt like wasting XP when you needed it for drinking and cooking. You crawl out of bed, basically a straw mattress full of bed bugs, and realize you're already debuffed. Every muscle is screaming. Life in the 1,870 seconds was a constant grind. 24/7, no weekends, no PTO, and zero ergonomic setups. Whether you were a farmer, miner, or ranch hand, your body was the only hardware you had until it glitched out. You think your job is mid? Frontier labor was a whole different level of hardcore. Backbreaking work that left even the strongest people looking like NPCs by their 30 seconds permanently hunched and arthritic. Imagine plowing fields for 14 hours, hauling water, or working in a mine shaft. No wonder the average lifespan was only like 35 years. Big yikes. You stand on the dusty floor and feel the chill. If it's winter, your cabin is basically a fridge 20 degrees below. If you had a fireplace, you probably let it go out to save fuel. No central heating or thermal fits in this era. And if it's summer, get ready to sweat through your whole aesthetic. No escaping the elements in the Wild West. Speaking of fits, forget comfort. Guys owned like 2 outfits, rough canvas pants and shirts that chafed like crazy. Girls wore a million layers, corsets, petticoats, and long dresses dragging in the dirt. High-key scratchy and rarely washed. Those fancy outfits in Western movies? Total cap for the average person. Your stomach is growling, time for breakfast. Hope you like beans, biscuits, and coffee on repeat. The Wild West diet was mid and definitely lacking nutrients. Fresh fruit and veggies were seasonal limited time offers. Meat was usually salty or smoked because refrigeration didn't exist. Scurvy, that's when your gums bleed and your teeth fall out, was a total vibe killer and super common. Even though it's an easy fix today, you'd think the coffee would be a banger, right? Movies always show a fresh pot, but what you're getting is barely coffee. It's boiled to death, bitter as heck, and might have eggshells or salt in it to mask the taste. Still, you need that caffeine hit to face the day, so you drink it, no complaints. Before you step out, check your kicks for scorpions or snakes. That's a daily side quest. Frontier folks had to shake out their boots every morning. One wrong move and you're facing a venomous bite mouse from any medical help. Massive. Stepping outside, you realize how exposed you are. The landscape is a whole vibe, sure, but it's unforgiving. Extreme weather could pull up, with no warning. Blizzards, tornadoes, floods, all of them meant game over for the unprepared. The sky might be clear now, but it can flip in minutes. If you're in a frontier town, you might think you're safe, but it's just different dangers. These towns were high-key hubs for disease. No sewage systems or understanding of germs meant illnesses spread fast. Cholera, typhoid, smallpox, major threats. One outbreak could wipe half the server in weeks. Speaking of towns, if you visit one today, you'll notice it's super haphazard. No town planning, just buildings wherever. The streets aren't paved, they're just dirt tracks that turn into mud pits when it rains and dust bowls when it's dry. The smell hits you again, even stronger this time. Horse manure is literally everywhere because that's the main ride. No street cleaners or sanitation crew. In some spots, the mess could be knee-deep. Flies are swarming you, and you realize why disease spreads so easily here. You walk down Main Street and past the saloon, probably the busiest spot in town. Forget the Hollywood version with swinging doors and piano players. That's mostly cap. Most were rough, one-room spots with basic furniture. The liquor wasn't some aged whiskey. It was raw alcohol mixed with tobacco juice, pepper, or even gunpowder to give it that extra kick. One drink could literally blind you if you're unlucky. The saloon is also where the violence happens. Drunken arguments escalated fast in an armed society. The skill level needed for these confrontations was high, but the chance of an L was higher. Most gunfights weren't these honorable showdowns you see on Netflix. It was usually just chaotic and impulsive energy that ended badly for someone. Those romanticized gunfights in movies? Rare. Most violence was impulsive, messy, and over trivial stuff. Everyone's packing heat, but not for the reason you think. Weapons were tools for hunting and protection from wildlife. The threat from bears, wolves, and snakes made going unarmed a rookie move. You might be surprised that many towns actually had strict gun control. Places like Dodge City required you to hand over your weapons when you entered. The famous OK Corral fight actually started because a gang refused to comply with the town's weapon rules. Quick draw duels at high noon, mostly a Hollywood invention. Real frontier violence was sudden, chaotic, and had zero sense of honor. You passed the local doctor's office. Medical care back then would horrify you. Most doctors had basic training at best. Surgery was done with whiskey as anesthesia, and sterilization wasn't even a thing yet. A simple infected cut could mean an amputation or worse. Common treatments included bloodletting and mercury, high-key toxic stuff that did more harm than good. Women in childbirth faced massive risks. Dentistry was just pulling teeth with no numbing. If you got sick, your survival was more about luck than the doctor's skill. Major L. Broken bones might never heal right, leaving you with chronic pain. Only the strong survive was literal. Your stomach growls again, time for lunch. You hit a local spot, likely just someone's house. The food is still mid. Meat is tough or spoiled. Food safety standards, non-existent. Dysentery and food poisoning were common occurrences. Even the water you quench your thirst with is suspicious. You're probably drinking from the same spot the cows just chilled. The risk of getting a permanent debuff from some bacteria is high-key stressful. You hear talk about recent attacks or outlaw gangs. While the movies exaggerate some stuff, the frontier was still a place of conflict. Outlaws were a real threat in remote areas. Law enforcement was sparse, with one sheriff responsible for thousands of square miles. Justice was often handled by vigilantes. Lynch mobs were common. The concept of innocent until proven guilty didn't really apply. If you were accused of horse theft, you might be hanging from a tree by sunset. Legit. This vigilante energy was low-key terrifying. No court cases, just a group of angry guys deciding your fate. You stay low-key and try not to attract any attention from the wrong squad. After lunch, you hit the general store. The prices are a shocker. Basic stuff costs way more because of transport. A can of peaches could be like $20 today. Most settlers spend all their coin on essentials with nothing left for luxury. The store shows another reality, the isolation. Mail was slow and unreliable. News was weeks out of date. You could go years without hearing from fam back east. Many settlers never saw their relatives again. High-key depressing. The psychological toll was huge: high rates of alcoholism and suicide. In the afternoon, you see dark clouds. Weather here isn't just a vibe, it's deadly. No modern forecasting meant storms arrived with zero warning. Blizzards could freeze you, tornadoes could wipe out a whole town with no emergency help, flash floods could wash you away. If you had a home, it was minimal protection, sod houses or log cabins that weren't effective against extreme weather. Summer heat was unbearable. As the storm hits, you head back. You pass miners heading to work the deadliest job. Cave-ins, toxic gas, and explosions claimed so many lives. Even if you survived that, long-term health issues like black lung were waiting. Imagine working in a dark hole for 12 hours, barely breathing, just for a chance at some gold that you probably won't even find. The grind was real, but the rewards were definitely mid for most players. Farming, ranching, logging, they all had high fatality rates. Your risk of injury was exponentially higher than today. You make it back to your leaky cabin and place buckets. Clean water was scarce, so people often drank from the same spot they washed in. Total health hazard. Logging was another high-stakes game. One wrong swing or a tumbling tree and you're taking a massive L. There were no safety harnesses or OSHA to back you up. You were literally just built different or you didn't last. Clean water was a W that not many people got to enjoy. Most of the time, the water you were drinking was low-key questionable. The risk of getting some permanent illness was just part of the daily aesthetic. Sitting in your leaky cabin, you realize the reality is nothing like the movies. No heroes or villains, just people struggling to survive. Night falls early because no electricity. Candles and oil lamps were the only light, and fire was a constant threat. One spark could mean losing everything. You prep for bed, totally exhausted after just one day. Muscles ache, stomach is unsettled, and your mind is fried from staying alert. You wonder if you'll even make it through tomorrow. The wind howls outside, a reminder of how small we are against the untamed wilderness. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. In the Wild West, survival was never guaranteed. It was earned hour by hour through hardship we struggle to even imagine. Morning light wakes you up. The body aches are real, but no time to chill. The Wild West waits for no one. You remember yesterday and wonder what's next. Let's say you decide to travel today. Travel in the 1,870 seconds was a whole different beast. Your body is screaming from the L that was your bed. You realize you need a better ride if you're gonna make it, but a horse is expensive. We're talking serious coin. Good news, the Transcontinental Railroad was done. Bad news, unless you were wealthy, you couldn't afford it. Most folks traveled by horse, wagon, or on foot. If you had a horse, you were high-key, lucky, but they were expensive to maintain. A good horse cost several months' wages. Then you needed feed and care. If it broke a leg, it was game over. Riding wasn't a pleasure cruise either. Saddles were built for function, not comfort. Blisters and aching muscles were guaranteed. If you couldn't afford a horse, you hit the wagon. Forget the romantic pioneer image. Wagon travel was brutal. No suspension meant you felt every bump. The constant jarring caused wagon sickness, leaving travelers miserable. Riding in a wagon for 10 hours a day, total L. Your back would be cooked and your head would be spinning. And the dust, it would mess up your whole aesthetic and your lungs at the same time. Between 1,840 and 1,860, 1-inch 10 didn't survive. They called it the nation's longest graveyard. Some estimate 10 to 15 deaths for every mile, a grave every 350 feet. Think about that. The trail was lined with crosses. Roads were just dirt tracks. Rain turned them to mud. Dry times made them dust bowls. Wagons broke down miles from anywhere. Let's say you're doing the Oregon Trail, a 2,000-mile journey and one of the most perilous ever. It's a miracle anyone made it to the end of that server. 2,000 miles of pure stress and hardship. Every single day was a battle against the environment and your own body. Disease was the Hashon killer. Cholera was devastating. You could be fine at breakfast and dead by dinner. No effective treatment. Wagon trains would lose dozens in one outbreak. Children were especially vulnerable. Crossing rivers was another deadly challenge. Wagons weren't made to float. Many capsized, drowning people and livestock. Contrary to popular belief, Native American attacks were rare. Most tribes were actually helpful with guidance and supplies. You're trying to cross the Platte River and your wagon starts to tilt. You're losing everything, your clothes, your gear, your family. It's a high-key nightmare scenario that happened to so many people. Most violent deaths came from accidents, getting crushed by wagon wheels or kicked by animals. Firearms accidents were common too because people were rookies with guns but carried them anyway. The psychological toll was massive. Families buried loved ones and had to keep moving immediately. No time for grief. Delay meant getting stuck in the mountains during winter. The stress led many to mental breakdowns or suicide. Imagine having to keep grinding after your brother just took an L to some disease. No time to pause the game, just keep moving or you're all cooked. That kind of mental pressure is unfathomable today. If you survived, you often arrived destitute. The Promised Land had its own harsh reality. Even short journeys were dangerous outlaws. Flash floods, heat strokes, or blizzards. Getting lost was a death sentence. You finally hit the West Coast, but your pockets are empty and you're sick. The W feels like an L. You realize the journey was just the introduction to a whole new level of the grind. The environment here is a different vibe. One day it's a drought, the next it's a flash flood. You're always on edge, waiting for the next disaster to drop. No weather app to check, just vibes and nerves. Navigation was a whole side quest on its own. One wrong turn and you're in the middle of a desert with no water. That's a total game over. You relied on luck and sketchy directions. You'll notice the diversity here. The West wasn't just white cowboys. It was a meeting of cultures, Chinese workers, Mexican families, black cowboys, 25% of the workforce, and European immigrants. And of course, the Native American nations who lived here for millennia. Diversity on the frontier did not equate to equality or harmony. Chinese laborers endured harsh discrimination. Mexican landowners often lost their property. Black Americans faced persistent racism, and Native communities suffered devastating consequences from westward expansion. Racial tensions were high-key toxic. You'd see communities segregated and people targeted just for being different. It was a dark side of the frontier that the movies usually skip or cap about. Mexican landowners had been there for generations, but then the rules changed and they lost their land to sketchy legal moves. Total injustice, frufra. It was a major L for those who had built their lives there. Their population was decimated by disease, warfare, and the destruction of their buffer resources. U.S. policies pushed them onto reservations. Treaties were broken whenever resources were found. Native kids were taken to boarding schools to erase their identity. Kill the Indian, save the man, was the policy. It was a systematic effort to delete a whole culture. The trauma from that era is still felt today. It's a deep and tragic history that we need to acknowledge, no cap. The way movies portray cowboys versus Indians is mostly cap. It misses the nuance and the fact that most interactions were actually trade and cooperation until the government stepped in with some toxic policies. Women on the frontier weren't just damsels, they did backbreaking work. They handled cooking and cleaning, but also worked the fields and defended the home. Their workday was sunrise to way past dark. Many became widows young and had to manage everything alone. A frontier woman would plow fields, deliver a neighbor's baby, and fight off a coyote all before lunch. They were the actual MVPs of the frontier. Main character energy for sure, but with none of the credit. They had almost zero legal rights too. Couldn't vote, couldn't own anything if they were married. It was a high-key, restrictive server for women. They had to be twice as tough just to get half the respect. Unmarried women had it even harder. Teaching was one of the only respectable jobs, but the pay was mid. Many had to get creative just to survive and keep their independence. Then there were the soil doves prostitutes. The reality was grim: abuse, addiction, and disease. Some found more freedom in the West because women were in short supply, and territories like Wyoming granted voting rights early to attract residents. It wasn't the glamorous life you see in some period dramas. It was a life of desperation and hardship. But some did manage to flip the script and build their own wealth and influence. Wyoming and Utah were actually ahead of the game, letting women vote way before the rest of the country. They knew that without the women, the frontier was just a doomed server. Law enforcement was complex. Towns had marshals, but rural areas had zero protection. Sheriffs relied on passes of citizens. Famous lawmen like Wyatt Earp moved between the law and questionable business. Federal marshals focused on major crimes. A single sheriff for a massive area, total chaos. You were basically your own law enforcement. If someone stole your horse, you had to gather a squad and go get it yourself. No, 911 to call. Wyatt Earp was a whole vibe, sometimes a lawman, sometimes a gambler. The line between hero and villain was low-key blurry. Everyone was just doing what they had to do to survive the grind. Informal community justice was common vigilantes. The iconic quick-draw gunfight was a myth. Most violence was impulsive and alcohol-fueled. Hanging was the standard penalty for serious crimes. Prisons were primitive and deadly. Lynch mobs were a terrifying reality. No trial, just a group of angry people and a rope. That's a level of cancel culture we can't even imagine today. No safety net at all. Most deaths weren't from epic duels. It was just bar fights that got out of hand. Too much raw alcohol and a bad vibe leading to a permanent game over. High-key tragic and avoidable. Evening comes and you seek shelter. Don't expect five-star vibes. Hotel rooms were basic, buggy, and privacy was zero. You might even share a bed with a stranger. Outhouses were shared by everyone. Sharing a bed with a random, total L. You'd be lucky if they didn't have lice or worse. And the noise from the other rooms, you'd hear every single thing. Zero privacy aesthetic. You pay your 25 cents and hope for the best. The sheets probably haven't been washed since the last player. You lay there with your eyes open, just waiting for the sun to come up so you can exit the room. Camping was also risky. Fire management was life or death. One mistake could start a massive forest fire. Campfire cooking was a skill most lacked. Night sounds, coyotes, strange birds triggered high anxiety for those used to city life. You try to cook some beans over the fire and you end up burning half of them. Now your dinner is mid and you're still hungry. The wind is howling and you're low-key terrified of what's out there. A fire built too big could be seen for miles. A fire built too small wouldn't keep the wolves away. It was a delicate balance of survival tactics every single night. The darkness out here is something else. No streetlights, no phone glow, just pure void. For anyone used to modern society, it would be a major psychological debuff. Predators like wolves and bears investigate camps. Stress of constant vigilance took a toll. Modern folks would find the vulnerability terrifying. You realized travel was grueling beyond belief. Skills took years to learn, and mistakes were fatal. Every morning you check your boots for scorpions. That's your morning routine. No checking emails, just checking for death in your kicks. High-key stressful way to start the day. You reflect on the journey so far. It's nothing like the filtered version in books. It's just a long, exhausting struggle to keep from taking an L. The skills you've had to learn fixing a wagon, starting a fire in the rain, tracking are now your only assets. If you lose those, you're cooked. Every day survived was a W. New day dawns, you survived the night. Maybe today you try mining. Stories of gold and silver strikes drew thousands, but the reality was brutal. Staking a claim was hard. Most rich areas were gone by the 1,870 seconds. You hear about some guy finding a nugget the size of a phone and your greed meter hits 100, but the odds of that happening to you are astronomically low. Most people just found debt and disappointment. You spend 12 hours a day bent over a stream in freezing water. Your hands are cracked and bleeding. Your back is cooked. And all you have to show for it is a few flakes of gold that won't even buy you a decent dinner. Hard rock mining was an even bigger L. You're tunneling into rock that's literally waiting to crush you. The air is toxic and the light is minimal. It's a claustrophobic nightmare for mid-wages. One wrong blast and the whole server collapses. You're buried alive in a tomb of rock. That's a permanent game over with no funeral. High key, the scariest part of the frontier. Toxic gases like carbon monoxide were silent killers. You wouldn't even know you were taking an L until it was too late. No detectors, just luck and vibes. Then there's the long-term health issues. Inhaling rock dust for years? Welcome to silicosis, a slow and painful suffocation. Your lungs are basically becoming rock. Massive yikes. Mercury used to process the gold. It messes with your brain. You start shaking and losing your mind. The quest for wealth ends up costing you your consciousness. Mine owners didn't care about your health. You were just an NPC to them. If you got hurt, they just hired the next guy in line. No workers' comp, no safety net. For all that risk, most miners made like $3 a day. The people actually getting the W were the guys selling the shovels and the whiskey. They were the ones playing the long game. Mining towns were the ultimate toxic lobby. Young single guys, too much booze, and constant violence. No families to keep the peace. It was a high-stakes environment where life was cheap. Sanitation was non-existent. The smell would be a 10/10 level of bad. Disease spread through the camps like a viral meme. You'd be lucky if you didn't catch typhoid or cholera within the first week. If you did strike it rich, getting your gold to a safe spot was another side quest. You'd be a walking target for every outlaw in the territory. The W could turn into an L real quick. Banks were sketchy. No insurance. A bank could just close its doors and your life savings are gone forever. No way to get it back. Total scam energy. Paper money was even worse. Each bank printed their own and half of it was probably fake. You tried to buy supplies and they'd tell you your currency is mid. High-key frustrating. So you decide mining isn't for you. Maybe ranching? It seems like more of a vibe. Open ranges, beautiful sunsets, and being your own boss. But nature has other plans. You need major capital to start a ranch. Cows, land, horses, it's expensive. You go deep into debt and then a drought hits. Your grass dies and your cows are cooked. Now what? Or a harsh winter pulls up. The great die-up of 1,886, 90% of the cattle just froze to death. Imagine waking up to find your whole business is just a field of ice, total L. Diseases like Texas fever could wipe out a herd in days. No vet, no medicine, you just watch your investment fade away. It's a high-stakes gamble with literal lives on the line. Cattle drives were 20-hour workdays. You're living in the dirt for months, eating beans and dust. The cowboys weren't these cool heroes, they were just exhausted, underpaid laborers. Stampedes were the ultimate disaster. One thunderclap and thousands of cows are running right at you. If your horse trips, you're toast. People got trampled to death all the time. River crossings were just as scary. Cows panicking in the water, drowning each other, and the cowboys. It's a chaotic mess that could end your journey in minutes. Most cowboys were teenagers or guys from marginalized backgrounds. They took the dangerous jobs because they had no other choice. It was a heavy grind for very little reward. What about farming? The Homestead Act sounds like a W, 160 acres for free. But the land they gave you was usually mid-arid soil with almost no rain. Eastern farming methods failed hard here. You have to build a sod house. It's literally just bricks of dirt. It's dark, it's damp, and it leaks whenever it rains. Snails and snakes live in your walls, not the aesthetic you were hoping for. Breaking the prairie sod is a nightmare. The roots have been there for centuries and they're tough as nails. It takes you a whole year just to prep a few acres. Your body's wrecked before you even plant a seed. Then the bugs come. Grasshopper swarms that are so big they block out the sun. They eat everything green, even your tool handles. You just sit there and watch your survival fade away. Drought, frost, hail. The environment is always trying to delete your progress. You're working 15 hours a day and you're still one bad storm away from starvation. If you get sick during harvest, you're cooked. No one to help you. Your whole family has to grind twice as hard just to keep from taking an L. The pressure is insane. Women often worked the fields right up until they gave birth and then were back at it a few days later. No maternity leave on the frontier. The work simply could not wait. Grain storage was another hazard. You could fall in and suffocate in minutes, or the building could collapse on you. Even a successful harvest was high-key dangerous. The isolation of farming was the real killer. Neighbors miles away, no one to talk to for weeks. People went prairie mad from the loneliness and the grind. You'd be lucky if you had some books to read, but mostly it was just silence and work. Alcoholism and depression were the secret bosses of the farming life. By the late 1872, you could work for wages in the growing towns. Maybe that's safer, but industrial safety was a joke. Factories were literal death traps for anyone not paying attention. You're working 12 hours a day for cents, no breaks. If you get hurt, you're fired instantly. No health care, no payout. You're just a cog in the machine until you break. Railroad work was a whole different L. Building the tracks in the blazing heat or freezing cold, handling unstable explosives to blast through mountains, high fatality rates, FR-FRA. Chinese workers were given the most dangerous tasks and paid the least. It was a high-key, exploitative server. They built the backbone of the West but were treated like NPCs, working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. You have zero time for a personal life. You just sleep and work. The grind is all-consuming and low-key soul-crushing. Company towns were a total trap. They pay you in script that you can only use at their store. They own your house, your food, your whole life. It's literal debt bondage. You can never save up enough to leave. Time on the frontier was different. No digital clocks. You lived by the sun. When the sun was up, you were working. When it was down, you were trying not to die of cold or boredom. Seasons dictated your whole life. Winter was a time of hunkering down and trying to survive on the food you preserved. Summer was a non-stop grind of physical labor. Punctuality only became a thing when the trains arrived. Before that, morning or sometime after lunch was as specific as it got. A slower vibe, but a much more stressful one. Entertainment was simple because people were exhausted. Storytelling was the OG Netflix. You'd gather around the fire and hear about some guy's journey or a local legend. Music was a major W when someone had a fiddle or a harmonica. Simple dances and songs were the high point of the social calendar, a rare moment of joy in a harsh world. Reading material was like a legendary drop. A single newspaper or book would be passed around the whole community until it literally fell apart. Every word was precious. Baseball was starting to pull up as a popular game, played on dirt fields with no gloves, high-key painful but a good way to blow off some steam after the grind. 4th of July was a huge event. People would travel miles for a picnic and some speeches. A moment of community in a world of isolation. You realize the people who survived this had to be psychological tanks. Their resilience level was off the charts. They dealt with loss and hardship every single day and kept moving. The silence of the night was intense. No traffic, no planes, just the earth breathing. It was a profound and sometimes scary quiet that we'll never experience. You wonder if you have the stats to survive here. Probably not. Your modern body would glitch out in the first 24 hours. No AC, no clean water, and constant physical threat. The Milky Way was the only 4K display they had, a massive, beautiful W that reminded them how small we really are, a moment of transcendent beauty in a gritty world. Hunger was constant. You're always thinking about the next meal because you worked for it with your own hands. Beans, corn, pork, it was mid, but it was fuel. Hunting for food was a high-stakes side quest. You need to hit your shot because ammo is expensive. If you miss, you're going hungry tonight. Pressure is 100%. Fresh fruit was like a rare item drop. You'd only see it for a few weeks a year. Most of the time, your diet was a repetitive loop of salt and starch. Scurvy was the final boss for many people. Your gums bleeding and your teeth falling out. That's a total horror movie aesthetic, all because you couldn't find an orange. Preserving food was a full-time job for women. Smoking meat, pickling veggies. If you messed up the process, you could literally poison your whole family. Zero margin for error. Properly salted meat would last months, but it tasted like pure salt. You'd be thirsty all day, which was another L because clean water was hard to find. Stored food was a magnet for rats and bugs. You just accepted that your flour had some extra protein in it. Hygiene was just not part of the frontier vibe. You're eating your biscuits and you find a beetle. You just shrug and keep eating. You need the calories to finish the next 8 hours of plowing. Total hardcore survival. Hauling water from a well or stream hundreds of pounds a day. It's a workout that never ends. Your back is permanently debuffed from the strain. Spices and sugar were luxury items. Most food was just bland and functional. You're eating to live, not for the vibe. A very different relationship with food than we have now. Obesity, non-existent. Everyone was a lean, mean survival machine, but not necessarily healthy. Malnutrition was high-key common among settlers. Childhood was short. By age 6, you're working. You have meaningful chores that the family depends on. You're not just playing, you're contributing to the survival coin. By age 12, you're doing adult-level tasks. Plowing, hunting, cooking. You witness life and death every day. No trigger warnings on the frontier, just hard reality. Girls learned the complex art of house management, making soap, candles, clothes. It was a deep skill tree that took years to master, essential for the frontier aesthetic. This early adulthood meant people were mature but also exhausted by their 20 seconds. You'd seen more in 15 years than most modern people see in a lifetime. Education was mid and inconsistent. One-room schools with kids of all ages. One teacher, who might not even be that smart, rote memorization and corporal punishment. Whipping was the standard discipline. Whispering in class, that's a paddle to the hand. The school server was high-key, strict, and low-key miserable for many. Supplies were minimal, one slate and a piece of chalk. Books were shared, you learned the basics, and then you went back to the farm to help with the harvest. Practical knowledge was the real education. Tracking, weather prediction, planting. If you could read a cloud, you survived. If you could read a book but weren't built for work, you were toast. Child mortality, 1 inch, 4 kids taking an early measles or whooping cough. Game over. No vaccines, no real medicine. It was a tragic and constant presence. Watching your siblings die was a normal part of life. Parents expected to lose half their kids, a level of trauma and grief that would break most modern people. Professional doctors were rare and sketchy. Their knowledge was basically medieval vibes, bloodletting and mercury for everything. They probably killed as many as they saved. Surgery without anesthesia, you just bite down on a piece of leather and hope you pass out. The pain would be at 10/10 level. Truly horrific stuff. No cap. Home remedies were the standard. Herbal tea and folk medicine. Some of it worked, some was just toxic placebo. You were basically your own doctor and pharmacist. Opium was used for everything laudanum, high-key addictive, and caused a lot of people to glitch out. It was a dark side of the medical aesthetic. Patent medicines were total scams. 90% alcohol and some toxic chemicals marketed as a cure-all. They'd give you a temporary buzz and then a permanent L. Amputation was the standard for any deep cut that got infected. Losing an arm for an injury that would be a 20-minute clinic visit today. Total nightmare fuel. Childbirth was the most dangerous side quest for women. 1 inch, 100 taking a permanent L. No prenatal care, no hospitals, just a midwife and some luck. Every pregnancy was a potential game over. Men's journals are full of heartbreak about losing their wives and raising kids alone in a harsh world. High-key, tragic. Nutrition was mid, medicine was mid, safety was mid, life expectancy was under 40, you were old by 35 and lucky to see 50. A very fast-paced and high-stakes life. Isolation was the silent boss of the frontier. No instant messages. Your nearest neighbor is a 2-hour horse ride away. You could go months without seeing a new face. Letters took months. News was ancient by the time it reached you. You lived in a small, localized bubble. Whatever happened in Washington didn't matter in the Oregon dirt. Women suffered the most from this. Their journals talk about crippling loneliness, prairie madness, people literally losing their minds from the lack of human connection. Some would get violent, some would just stop talking. It was a psychological debuff that would be hard to heal in that environment. Total mental health, L. Social gatherings were rare and precious. Barn raisings or church socials. You dress in your best scratchy clothes and travel 10 miles just to talk to another adult. Churches were the hubs of the community. Even if you weren't religious, you went for the social W. It was the only place to link up with the whole squad. The minister was the teacher, the judge, and the community leader. A high-influence role that kept the server running smoothly in the middle of nowhere. Building a school or church marked the transition from wilderness to community. It was a sign that you were planning to stay and build a lasting presence. Mutual aid was the only way to survive. You help your neighbor build their barn, they help you with your harvest. No one could 1v1 the frontier and win. A child goes missing, the whole town forms a search party instantly. No hesitation. You knew that tomorrow it could be you needing the help. Total community W. This balance of individual toughness and communal support is what eventually tamed the West. It wasn't the lone gunman, it was the squad working together. You reflect on the resilience required to do this year after year, to lose a crop or a child and just keep grinding. That's a level of built different that's hard to grasp. Dusk pulls up and you realize how small and fragile you really are. One bad storm, one snake bite, one infected cut, and it's game over. Constant vigilance is the only way. You drift off to sleep, haunted by the questions. What drove them out here? What kept them going when everything was an L? A deep mystery of human endurance. Your dreams are full of endless prairies and the faces of those who came before. Ordinary people facing extraordinary hardship. Their legacy is the world we have now. Final day in the simulation. The sunrise is a banger golden light over the mountains. The nature vibe is at 10/10ths, but you know the danger it hides. The nature here was magnificent, but people treated it like an infinite resource. Timber, cut it down. Animals, hunt them all. No thought of preservation, just consumption. Buffalo, 60 million, reduced to 1,000 inches a few decades, a massive environmental L. And it was partly a policy move to starve the native tribes. High-key toxic move. General Sheridan literally said to exterminate them so civilization could advance. Heartless energy that destroyed a whole ecosystem and way of life. It was environmental warfare. For the native nations, the frontier was an apocalypse. Not just losing land, but losing their whole world and their future. Reservations were just confinement zones. Treaties were broken every time someone found gold or a better route. Zero honor from the government side. Boarding schools were a horrific effort to delete a people's culture. Kill the Indian, save the man, taking kids from their fams to erase their language and religion. Serious. The trauma from those schools is still affecting generations today. It's a dark stain on the history that we can't ignore if we want the true story. Pratt, the founder of those schools, was proud of what he was doing. He thought he was helping. Total delusional energy that caused massive suffering. Indigenous victories like Little Bighorn were rare and led to even more brutal military campaigns. The W just made the government come back 10x harder. It was a collision of worlds with no middle ground. The loss of agricultural and governance knowledge from those tribes was a tragedy for the whole human server. Native people didn't believe in owning land. How can you own the air? This mismatch in philosophy made treaty talks a disaster from the start. The West was a melting pot of tension and struggle. Chinese railroad workers were the MVPs but got the worst treatment. Riots and mass expulsions when the economy got mid. Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first time the US banned a specific nationality. Pure racist energy that lasted decades. High-key shameful part of the timeline. Mexican citizens suddenly found themselves in a new country with new rules that were rigged against them. Land stolen by legal fraud, a major L for those families. Arid farming systems that had worked for centuries were replaced by English laws that didn't make sense in the desert. Total failure of regional logic. Even European immigrants were segregated. Irish, Germans, Scandinavians, each in their own bubble. Tensions between them were always simmering under the surface. Black cowboys, 25% of the workforce ignored by the movies and the books. They did the work but didn't get the credit or the W's their white co-workers got. Black homesteaders tried to build their own towns, but faced constant harassment and theft. Even on the frontier, the land of the free had restricted access. By the 1880 seconds, the wild was being deleted. corporate interests like railroads and mining companies were taking over the server. The individual prospector was becoming an NPC. Railroads changed the game. 6 months travel turned into 6 days. Now everything is connected. Eastern factories are flooding the West with cheap, mid-quality goods. Independent miners couldn't compete with the big guys and their machines. The era of luck was over. The era of capital had begun. A shift from survival to profit, squeezing the small farmers and ranchers with high transport fees and low pay. The big core were the new bosses of the West, not the sheriffs, the CEOs. Water rights, grazing access, all allocated to those with the most influence. The freedom of the frontier was being replaced by regulation that favored the wealthy. Towns were getting brick buildings and serveried streets. The chaos was being tamed. Frou. Some people hated it and kept moving west to find a fresh server, but by the 1890 seconds, the frontier was declared closed. There was no more empty land to run to. The game had reached its limits. The psychological shift was massive. Law and order were established. No more vigilantes. The professionals had taken over. The Wild West was now just the West. A new era of domesticated life. Legendary outlaws like Jesse James or Billy the Kid were just criminals in a transitional period. Most people just wanted peace and stable work, not a gunfight. Their lives were mostly morally ambiguous. James was no Robin Hood. He was a violent ex-guerrilla. Earp was a gambler, lawman hybrid. The truth is much more messy. Why are we so obsessed with the mythology? Because it offers a simple narrative of American identity, rugged individualism, courage, and inevitable progress. Buffalo Bill Cody's shows were the OG hype machine, staged battles for Eastern audiences who had never seen a real bison. He was the influencer of his day. Dime novels were written by guys who had never been West. They invented the Western aesthetic in their NYC offices. Pure marketing for a hungry audience. These stories were formulaic. Good guy wins, bad guy takes an L. It made the chaotic reality of the frontier feel like it had some kind of higher purpose. Hollywood Westerns took the frontier and turned it up to 11. Lone heroes, always clean-shaven and flawless. Nothing like the messy, challenging life people actually lived. These stories painted expansion as noble and justified, giving the impression of a tidy, heroic past. The myths hid the truth, hardship, conflict, and the constant struggle of communities trying to survive. The real West had no neat moral lessons, just people navigating impossible conditions. You wouldn't last a day out there, hungry, thirsty, and constantly on edge. Modern skills, mostly useless. Yet that raw honesty tasks with immediate consequences is why we're still fascinated. It was simpler, yes, but far more intense. The real triumph? Community. People relied on each other because they had to. That sense of interdependence is something we rarely experience in today's individualistic world. Coming back to 2025, you appreciate AC, clean water, and safety. But you can't help wondering if we've lost some of that frontier grit, the kind that only extreme circumstances can build. The legacy of the frontier is in everything we do, our laws, our mindset, our culture. It's the foundation of the American identity, for better and for worse. We need to see the whole story, the courage and the devastation, the W's and the L's. That's the only way to truly understand where we came from. The stars tonight are the same ones those pioneers watched, a silent connection across the timeline. You feel a kinship with their struggle and their persistence. Night falls on your final day. The wind in the grass, it's the same sound they heard 150 years ago. A profound and timeless aesthetic. You'll never see a Western the same way again. You'll see the cap and the filters. You'll appreciate the grit and the sacrifice of the ordinary people more. The self-sufficient skills they had were legendary. Building a house, curing meat, fixing anything with basic tools. A level of competence we rarely see today. This story doesn't need the Hollywood embellishment. The truth is interesting enough on its own. A history of tragedy, innovation, and persistence against all odds. The real Wild West is gone, replaced by highways and Starbucks. But the echoes of the frontier are in every community and every regional identity across the country. Memory of that era shapes how we understand our destiny and our responsibility. We're still trying to replace the myths with facts and inclusive history. You're surrendering to sleep at last. Past and present blurring into one massive, interesting narrative. The same challenges, resources, community, adaptation are still here. The greatest legacy is the questions we still ask. How do we live together in a hard world? How do we balance freedom and community? Every generation has to find their own answers. The stars are shining brilliantly now, guiding the travelers and comforting the homesick immigrants back then, a moment of transcendent cross-timeline connection. Final thought: the real Wild West, without the filters, is a window into the human soul, frightening, elemental, and low-key sublime. A journey worth taking. Fra. Signing off. Stay wild, stay curious, and always shake your boots out. No cap. History out.
you.